You're with Julian on the Brown Notes and a review of the latest Boards of Canada album Inferno, which is causing a great deal of consternation online, as this is from a legendary act and there's a massive gap of 12, 13 years since their previous album. So they're a brother duo from Scotland, Mike Stanson and Marcus Eon, who I believe are brothers, but they kept that quiet for a little bit. They defined an entire world of electronic music, one that sounded analog and warm and odd and strange and ominous. Their first two albums, Music Has the Right to Children and Geo Gaddy, are regarded as masterpieces from 98 and 2002 that led to other acts being called a bit like Boards of Canada. For many years to come, they were right up there with the likes of Aphex Twin in defining music, electronic music that came out of Britain, but much less heavy on the album releases, as they've only done a few over their whole career. Now, those two albums are unimpeachable landmarks, and it kind of tapered off, but not to a terrible extent. The Campfire Head phase came out in 2005. And Tomorrow's Harvest in 2013, their last album, was relatively well received. It was a pretty decent album. Inferno has indeed caused some consternation, with people defining it as an all-time classic and others saying that it is a little bit less than so. One very important fact is it's Sanderson that seems to be in control of this whole album, and the other brother much less so. And I do feel that comes through, as there's something missing here. And I do wonder if that balance of them both being equally involved is part of it, or it's just the passage of time. In Troy opens it, just a burbling Boards of Canada fragment, very similar to what you'd expect from them. Prophecy at 1420 megahertz is one of the big tracks, which is the second on the album, that does something that a lot of the album does, which it presents a very high fidelity indie rock-ish version of Boards of Canada that doesn't quite have the depth or weirdness or emotion of them at their best. It reminded me a bit of what people like Santa Gold, if you remember her from the sort of late to mid 2000s, were merging indie rock guitars into more sort of electronic soundscapes, and perhaps not as forward-thinking as their best music. But I did like, the actual riff and the production on this album is multi-million-dollar sounding. It reminded me a little bit of More Than This by Roxy Music. It's a really big widescreen sound, very spacious. It's just a bit straightforward, I feel. I Am God in the vocals. There does seem to be some themes here that are quite political and overt for Roxy Music. But the sort of textural subtlety which they were most famous for, and the emotion that came with their analog synths, is a bit in the background. Another trip-hop analogous track with Hydrogen, Helium, Lithium, Leviathan. Just very expensive production. I didn't really rate the opening run of tracks. Not quite the personality of them or the individuality, but some of that turquoise hexagon sunset coming through in the synths at times. The beatless Age of Capricorn is more textural, and the USA chants. One of the big problems with this album is vocals, and it's not that they use a lot of backgroundy vocals that are heavily distorted. They work really well. It's the very foreground clear male voices, a couple of different male voices, I think, that really dominate the mix on some of these tracks, and they're sometimes saying things that are a little bit political but trite. And it's very loud. It's very clean. Like when you hear some of the other vocals where they've down-tuned them and they've distorted them, it works a lot better. Here it's very, very dominating. Father and son, much more sort of, again, hexagon sort of style. And the different vocal snippets work better. I don't like the lead vocals on these, but what I did like is these tracks remind me, especially the ones with the vocals, remind me of Snivelization era Orbital, one of my favourite albums of all time, and one of the most textural electronic albums this side of Music Has a Right to Children. It feels like an argument between a MAGA family where the kids don't like Trump and the parents like Trump. Like I said, a little bit trite, if well-meaning. I would have turned off the sample. And like I said, I think one band member's dominating here on most tracks, and whether that has caused the band to lose some balance. They were always much more mysterious than they are straightforward here. There's a beatless interlude for Somewhere Right Now in the Future, which is alright. I like the old school synths on Naraka. It's after that first run on the album, which is very rigid, sort of like 4x4 beat with an indie guitar sample, and it's very rigid. But I think the tracks as the album go on, they become more fluid, and I thought that was the case with Naraka. Everything's a little bit more fluid and a bit more, maybe even gothic-y, maybe even more old school. I think Memory Death might be the most developed evocation of those first two albums of Boards of Canada. It has that texture and emotion that a lot of the bigger tracks don't have. More orbital with The Word Becomes Flesh, more complex percussion as well. And it's got vocals, but it doesn't use those very prominent male voices, so it works a bit better. It's a bit more cohesive. And I think the subject matter here may well be abortion. So that's quite well handled as it goes through the development of a fetus. I thought that was quite a good track lyrically and worked across the board. Into the Magic Land, it's got that woolly folk psych thing that does come hand in hand with the electronica of Boards of Canada, actually. And it sounds like more like a live instrumentation, which is putting them very much in the same bracket as modern Mogwai, another Scottish act. Blood in Labyrinth is a good one. Nice use of bass, nice space in it, and instead of like an indie guitar, they use a sitar for a riff that actually does work, and a female vocal that reminds me of sort of Max and K era Tricky, actually. There's a fuller trip-hop song, All Reason Departs, which has got some nice percussion and lots of elements in it, and some actual progression. I think a lot of these tracks don't progress. They arrive and are developed within a minute and drop down and then come back up, and they don't really go off on any tangents or development, and that I thought that one did a bit. The Arena Americanada, I like that Americanada. I thought was a bit more dynamic, more colour maybe. I think like it's fine. It's fine. There's a couple of tracks to go, but it's continuing in the same vein. What I found myself thinking about is comparing this album to the last year album by One O Tricks Point Never, another very individualistic electronic artist, and the level of personality, individualism, and compelling electronic music that he put on that album compared to this, which is a lot more sort of rote. It is a bit like somebody has got all of the elements of Boards of Canada on a Boards of Canada making music machine and plugged them in, but without too much in the way of inspiration. And even someone like The Bug, like I was listening to his album Machine, like the monolithic industrial dub music, just so much more compelling and interesting, even though he's an artist that has been making music for longer than Boards of Canada. And I found myself coming back to this, which was, I gave a bad review to the last Mogwai album, and I thought that it was kind of them trying to go a bit indie, but it didn't really work on any level. It was kind of like perfunctory versions of what Mogwai had done in the past, all clipped and knocked down. And I don't know that any particular track on here I would call a standout. I think it all kind of merges into one. You'll not find better background music than this. It is so lushly produced. It is beautiful to listen to. But at the same time, when I review albums, I have to stare at them and listen to each detail on a track, and it becomes a lot more monotonous, and it doesn't always work, and I didn't find much in the way of inspiration. So even though I, like all of you, wanted to love this album and it be a modern masterpiece, I am only going to give Wars of Canada Inferno a 6.5 out of 10.